Hi you guys, and welcome back, and today we're going to practice this mountain landscape here. To get things started though, we better practice our techniques first. This one's a little bit tricky, so I recommend you practice before you start. So we'll put in a soft green mix, and I am using cobalt green as a base and adding bits of Sennelier Yellow Deep and also some French Ultramarine to get some variation in here. And first thing you do is just laying down some color and then tapping the other colors into it. And you can see below I've kind of mapped out where the bigger foreground flowers are going to be. So when we're working on the actual painting, we'll start by pulling in the background, and when you get close to that foreground area, then you start going straight to the solid color of the flowers. So you can dot the color into the green and it will still stay pink and flare out into the green. And then these big foreground ones, I'm just painting the pink first. And I found one trick that kind of helps to keep things wet enough while you're moving here is to drop a little extra water into the pink and then come back around quickly with the green again. And you're just letting these wet edges touch one another so that it kind of melts into the other color. So you gotta move very quickly for this to work, and we were working today on a very hot, dry sort of a day, so everything was drying very fast on us. So what I did to solve that problem was come back again with the pink and just dash more pinks back into where it was starting to dry. And I'm also sprinkling in some more pinks, just get some random dots. So at this stage, everything is still wet and is on the verge of drying. And if you can get your timing right with this, now is the time you want to come in with a little spray bottle and give it a very delicate little spritz. And you can see how those little extra white blossoms are forming where the water hit. And now for the stems, you got to do that quickly too. And I'm just using the back of a sharp edge brush to scrape away the paint. So if it all comes back in and you get a dark line instead of a white line, that means you're too wet. You just got to wait a little bit longer. Everything with this one is really careful timing. All right, so that is pretty much our main effect. Tap in a little more pink. And now I want to try to practice some of these little background trees. So I'm just using the yellow and the French ultramarine to get kind of a dark forest green. And if you need to get it darker, just add a touch of red. And I'm just lightly scraping on the shape of these trees. So you start with your brush make the point be the tip of the top of the tree there, and then just scrape the rest of it down back and forth. So you're just wiggling it on. And then you can scrape in a couple of the little trunks using that same technique that we did on the stems down there. All right, so now it's time to get to the painting. So I'm going to first draw on my little hillside in the mountains. And then I'm also going to place my foreground flowers, get the main shapes. And I'm not drawing stems or grasses or anything like that. I'm just doing the outside shape of the clumps of pink. And those guys, the foreground flowers, just take the bottom third of the page. The middle third is your middle ground, and the top third is for the background. Okay, so I will start this sky with a very soft water yellow. That is the undercolor. And then I use the pointy side of the brush, so I kind of paint upside down when I'm carving around these mountain shapes. And while it's still wet, I got to come in with some slashes of pink, and it is important to have very little water and mostly just the pigment on your brush so you don't get those big blossoms in there. And next color, I throw on some purple. So I'm trying to do these in just kind of one stroke movements, not running back through stuff over and over again. And then you just kind of let it sit and melt and do its thing. All right, so now I just drew the tops of the mountains, and I'm going to come back in with my pencil and map out some of the different faces of the mountains so I don't get lost when I'm painting. Now this one's got a little bit of snow caps, so I'm going to make sure I mark those areas off so I reserve those too. Okay, so now that I've got something to follow, let's mix up this background mountain color. I'm using rose, French ultramarine, and some quinacridone gold to create a kind of warm, sort of muddy purple gray. So usually if you use your primaries in 3 equal amounts, you should get black, and then you just water it down. And see, this is a little too dark for a faraway color, so I'm going to add more water. When you're working from a photograph like we are today, you don't want to make the mountains as dark as they appear in the photograph. It will not give you the right sense of distance. So I'm just adding extra water and pushing the pigments around, trying to get a little bit of variation in there in the value and make it look like I've got some lumps in my mountains. And I'm just painting around the snow areas. You can also dash in a little bit stronger pigment too to create some different faces on there. And then I am, with a damp brush, kind of softening that bottom edge of the mountain. Alright, so as this is drying, I am realizing that those white snow caps are a little too white. So I will go back in with kind of a soft sort of mix of the sky colors and just float that over the snow to soften those whites a bit. Especially at this time in the evening, nothing would be that bright white. And now I've got a little bit more blue back into that homemade gray mix, and I'm going to add just some more shadow faces onto the mountains. And again, just softening that bottom edge. Okay, so let's start moving into the grassy field. And we'll mix a faraway green. Again, I have got cobalt green, and I'm adding French ultramarine and yellow to it. So I'm pointing my brush upside down because I got the color towards the pointy end, and it's watery as you get towards the base of the brush. So when you push down on the side, you get color on one end and a soft edge on the other. So that blends those two seamlessly together. I'm going to have a little bit of variation in my greens coming down. I want to build the intensity as it's getting closer to us to give us a sense of distance. Okay, so now I'm covering my sky as I dot in these pinks because I don't want a bunch of pink polka dots in my sky and mountains. So always remember to cover before you start doing these kind of little splash marks everywhere. And now we need the row of pink in the big foreground pinks. And again, I'm trying to move as fast as I can, dashing more water back into those pinks to try to keep them moist so that they will stay wet till I come back with my green. This part is always such a race. Alright, so quick in with the greens. And just touching the edges, letting them bleed in together. Alright, so moving as quickly as I can. Now I got to come back with the pinks where it was starting to dry and charge those pinks up some more. Tap in some more random ones. Okay, now a very gentle light spritz to get the blossoms. And I gotta get that bottom area to be just dry enough for my scrapes to work. You see these first ones were too wet, so the corners need to wait a little bit longer. There we go. Yeah, so now we got a nice, soft, natural looking field, and we just got to put in our little trees and make sure that they're relative to the size of the mountains there. And again, not too heavy and dark. And remember to scrape in a couple of those little tree trunks as you're going. So keep some of these guys in little clumps and varying heights, and just use them to create a sense of balance. So there's just these last little trees, and that's it for this one. Thanks you guys for joining me, and remember to please subscribe, and I will see you again next week.